is rewards and punishments. So with these young children, serendipitous, I said that they were preschool children. Serendipitous that they were of mixed ages, from 3 to 6. Serendipitous that they were as numerous as they were, because she says they were around 50 of these children. That's a big number, all in the same environment, and gradually building a community. Serendipitous, actually, that they came from underprivileged families, right? And poor socioeconomic circumstances, because they hadn't been spoiled by material wealth. They took to the materials very easily because they didn't have things like that in their own homes. They weren't bored already with a wealth of toys that was sort of the kind of almost like a weight on them, right? Anyway, she discovers also that with these children, rewards and punishments are absolutely meaningless, right? So the idea of rewarding, even praising, right, or punishing was absolutely useless. I mean, so typical, isn't it, in traditional education? What is your reward? Well, I mean, if you get a high mark, most people consider that as a reward, right? But with these children, rewards were irrelevant, punishments were irrelevant. What was important was the fact that they were working toward their own development, even if they were driven unconsciously by nature. Oh, next one we have is the silence exercise, so there was a silence lesson. So to her, it was a total discovery that these children could enjoy silence. Okay, and if you think about it, walking on the line and silence lesson, game, exercise, whatever you call it, are put together with a practical life outcome. Of course, it's aren't they? They have to do with the refinement of movement. Isn't it interesting? The silence lesson comes under the refinement of movement. But if you think about it, it makes total sense. Because to make silence, you have to be completely still. And to be completely still, you have to have complete control over your own body. You've got total mastery over your body. And the children enjoyed the silence. We used to wonder in Bergen, we used to ask ourselves, you know this custom and tradition of having 5 minutes of silence when you want to honor something or respect something? The first time we ever came across this silence was here with these first couple of children. They refuse sweets, right? So they're not, again, this is like, well, there's the needs of the body. Children are typically said to have a sweet tooth, and there are evolutionary reasons for that, why we have a sweet tooth, or we like sweetness, we like saltiness, and so on. Good evolutionary reasons, which are not helping us in our modern times. But anyway, there's food for the body, but there's also food for the mind, food for the soul, food for the psyche, call it what you will. And what they were showing was that this was more important in the end than satisfying the stomach or the mouth or whatever. I remember one anecdote she recalls when a visitors were always needing toys and gifts of various kinds, and also, anyway, one visitor brought biscuits. And unexpected, of course, offered biscuits, children took a biscuit, and the visitor expected to start eating the biscuits, instead of which they looked at the biscuits and started saying, oh, I have a circle, and they say, oh, I have a rectangle, and so on. So even, what you think of as food would be popped into the mouth was an occasion of reflection, had to do with, well, the children's own developing observations of the world through the work that they were doing. Okay, and then we come to, I've written, reading came later. Right. Well, you all know that back then, with the Italian language, which by the way is a highly phonetic language, and therefore very different to the English language, the children spontaneously started was a spontaneous thing. They weren't taught writing. What they were given was a means to indirectly prepare themselves for writing, right? But none of those materials and exercises were obviously writing. In other words, metal insets for drawing that we use in language, the sandpaper letters, the movable alphabet. The child is not physically writing. There's no physical act. There's no actual handwriting. Okay, so they spontaneously started to write by hand. And for them, it was a discovery from Montessori. They could do that, and it was a discovery for the children themselves. That's why she's got, I've written, exclamation marks since a child, who actually writes a work. She asks the child to draw to there on a terrace with chalk and so on. Maybe I don't know what they have together with chalk. But anyway, she says to the child something like, oh, draw a tree or a hand or whatever. The child, instead of drawing a picture, writes the word and then realizes what he's done. Okay? Says, I've written. And then it's like a healthy contagion that spreads among the young children, and they want to do it too. And what she actually says is the children became so mad at writing that they were writing everywhere. It was an uncontrolled explosion. They were writing on the walls. The mother said they were writing on the bread. Incredible. And the writing came first, of course, and the reading later. I'm not going to go into details, but that's because reading is intellectually more demanding. Writing is more demanding in terms of the work of the hand, but reading is more demanding from an intellectual point of view, requires more maturity, and therefore, if the children are young enough, the writing comes first and the reading comes later. That's not true if the children are learning written language when they're older. So compulsory education starts at 6. We're not going to see writing coming first and reading later. Okay? And that is when Montessori making discovery after discovery with these children. It's when there's this explosion into writing that she says she can't believe these children, right? That she decides then to dedicate herself completely to children. Because this is just the last in a series of discoveries. And of course, this is where she starts to think we don't know the true nature of these young children. So what she's discovering is the actual true nature, I keep emphasizing nature, right? Because nature is what we're interested in today. But it's all about nature, stories we know. Anyway, it's when they have this possibility to develop in a natural way, the conditions have to be right for that. But she also says to new children, because other things, you know what I skipped over? That's so important too. Their sense of dignity, right? And spontaneous discipline. So as they respond to what they observe about the children, by which I mean Dr. Montessori and the help of the person who's there with the children all the time, as they respond appropriately to what the children are revealing, like giving them the freedom and so on, and therefore providing conditions for spontaneous, free development, normal, natural development, right? What's amazing too is that the children start to show a discipline which is also spontaneous. It's not taught. It's spontaneous. Everything that's spontaneous, and you have to notice all the times in the story uses the word spontaneous, comes from nature. Comes from within the child, and therefore from nature, to the point where you can say, what we have to do is to give the freedom to the nature that's within these children, this nature that can be seen as the inner teacher, give the freedom to the inner teacher that every child has, which will get the children to develop in a natural, healthy, harmonious way. Right? And personal dignity comes along with having freedom, with being able to take initiative. with being able to relate to others, the freedom to move in the environment. It's not you move when somebody says to move. All of which leads to extraordinary independence, which leads for the age, and which leads to dignity. The taking of initiatives. Montessori gives us all kinds of examples, which we haven't got time for, but she gives all kinds of examples. So anyway, what strikes the outside world so much that hits the press, probably above all, is this spontaneous writing that the children start with. And so it's the press that starts talking about the new children. And there's a journalist actually in England who writes a book, a whole book called The New Children. It's based on interviews that she does with Maria Montessori, with Dr. Montessori, who holds courses in London every other year. In the interwar years between the First World War and the Second World War, Montessori is going every 2 years to the UK to London to give courses. And this particular British journalist, who has actually an Italian name, interviews her in the Times Educational Supplement, and then writes a book on the basis of those interviews that's called The New Children. Right? And they do seem extraordinary, these children, right? And they reveal a child that nobody seems to have encountered. Right? And that's why she can refer to them as new children. She also refers to, well, just think of the titles that she uses for her books. The Discovery of the Child. The Discovery of the Child originally had a very long title in Italian. So long that the people who published it in the English language at the library called it the Montessori Method in English. But the Montessori Method came out in about 5 or 6 editions, I think 5 editions. And the last one, Montessori gave her own title. Instead of it being called the Montessori Method, she gave it the title of The Discovery of the Child. So, the secret of childhood, the discovery of the child, a talk that she gives, two natures of the child. You know, there's the nature that we all think of as adults, which, as far as Montessori is concerned, in the end has to do with prejudice, conception of prejudice, okay? As opposed to the true nature of this young child. But that only reveals itself when the conditions are right. And what was happening simultaneously in those children's house was the children revealing something about themselves and the conditions being changed. Then the children revealed more about themselves and the conditions are changed once again. Right? The conditions that are offered to those children. And they always have materials as a means to develop. So if we're thinking of development and the approach, well, you can't separate first what's going on within that first children's house because they're feeding into one another all the time. Right? Anyway, it gives us these new extraordinary children that are hiding, let's say, within all children, right? But that often don't have the opportunity to reveal themselves, and then in the end gets masked with an unhealthy kind of development, deviating kind of development. How can we sum up? Right, how can we sum up the conditions, right? Because we can't always go through all of the detail. How can we actually sum it all up? But, well, before I come on to that, let me just say, it was the children's freedom, the fact that the children have freedom, that enabled Dr. Montessori to keep observing natural development. We're not going to observe natural development if the children don't have freedom, right? Which means freedom over their time, freedom to relate to others, freedom for this, freedom for that, endless the list of freedoms that we start thinking about. Anyway, it was that freedom that's offered to the children, the right kind of freedom, not license. It was that freedom that enabled her to make all of those amazing discoveries and for the true nature of the child to be revealed which means the kinds of activities that they undertake, the kind of work that they do, the kind of character they start to reveal about themselves, the characteristics that we come to understand about that age, about that particular plane of development, the social relationships that they spontaneously form, the kind of community that they spontaneously create, which is what she calls a society by cohesion. Right? And of course, those years 3 to 6 that she starts with remain the most observed, studied, written about of all of the years that we indicated with that first slide, the years of development through maturity. And so anybody interested in Montessori approach, if they're interested in years 3 to 6 or the children's house, they have so much more to read in Montessori work than any of the lessons. And what's amazing is that there also the approach continues to evolve. So I want to leave the children's house because I have to stay there forever. But before I do, it's really important to understand that in all those decades, a lot of development took place also in terms of the Montessori approach, the Montessori method, for the years 3 to 6. If an American AMI consultant went to that first children's house to decide whether it would be approved by AMI or not, they would never have approved Dr. Montessori's first children's house. Because all the materials weren't there. You know, and so immediately that would have meant they couldn't be approved. Because so many more materials entered the children's house later. Anyway. Yes. So, how does Montessori sum up, right? This approach to education that involves offering freedom, the right kind of freedom that comes along with the right sort of conditions. She sums it up as a prepared environment and the non-intervention. Sometimes she actually says non-intervention, and sometimes she says limited intervention of the adult. Okay? And she calls these two the two pillars of the Montessori approach. Two pillars of the Montessori approach, right? So these are really, really important principles, right, that we have. All right. But now, over time, Dr. Montessori is able to understand, because she doesn't remain working only with children ages 3 to 6. Over time, she sees that this approach, although some things remain the same, certain Montessori principles remain the same, but she comes to understand how these also have to change with the age of the individual. What's offered has to change with the age of the individual, right? And of course, when we stop to reflect, everything is obvious with hindsight. And when we stop